So there will be. So the recording is now in progress. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to introduce you to David Kiehn on a piece of video. So Kristen, if you'd like to play that video, please. Stand by, folks.
We're still admitting people. We're up to 70. Here we go.
What happened to the audio?
I'm David Kiehn with the Niles Film Museum. Over the years, we've gotten films usually in batches, a dozen at a time, sometimes hundreds, even thousands.
Somebody else on this.
But even one film can make a difference. And that's the case in the particular film that came in this can. In August of 2011, an older couple came into the museum with this can and said that they'd found it in their basement 42 years before. There were no markings on the can, no markings on the leader, but if you pulled it out and looked at it, you could see it looked like some kind of parade. And when we opened up the can and looked at it, first thing that I noticed was that the perforations were non-standard. That meant that the film was made some time before 1910. After that time, Bell & Howell made a film perforator that was better than anybody else's, and it literally standardized the dimensions and distance of perforations from that point on. To this day, if you buy a roll of 35 millimeter motion picture film to put in a camera, it has Bell & Howell perforations. But this particular film did not. They looked rather crude, in fact. So my first task was to kind of try and figure out when this film was made, who made it, and what the film was. The first thing I did was scan a few frames at a time on a flatbed transparency scanner. In looking at those frames on the computer, I noticed that there was two different scenes that were shot with this particular film. One scene with a government-type looking building in the background that had no particular identification marks. And another was a street scene with, in the background, you could see Park Theater, Cleveland Club, and Hendricks Cafe. I knew that Park Theater would not be a particularly easy way of identifying the location, because how many Park Theaters would there have been at that time in the United States? Cleveland Club seemed to be the most promising answer, kind of indicating that it might be Cleveland, Ohio. But in looking at the city directories and searching online for Cleveland Club, I couldn't find anything with that name. So it seemed like a dead end. In looking at the wagons, circus wagons in the film, you could see that they were unique wagons. They appeared to be hand-carved. And in looking up the internet, I could actually identify some of those same wagons in the film as being with the Ringling Brothers Circus website, Circus World Museum. So that was one clue anyway. Going back to the film again, I noticed that in the background, there was a electric trolley car line that went through the frame as the parade was going by. And I could see a sign on the top that said Blake, indicating it was a Blake Street line. Over the years, a lot of cities have put up their transit history, and I was surprised to find a Blake Street line in Indianapolis, Indiana. So that was the first clue of a location. In looking at the Indianapolis, Indiana city directories, I found that there was actually a Cleveland Club in the city for just 2 years, 1902 and 1903. Another site online had the Ringling Brothers circus itinerary from the 1800s into the 1920s. And in looking into the itinerary for the Ringling Brothers in Indianapolis, I found that they had been there in 1902, but not 1903. And the date that they were in Indianapolis was May 12th, 1902. So that seemed to pin down the date that the movie was filmed. In our collection, we have a catalog from 1908 that actually described the Ringling Brothers Circus Parade, and it was released by the Sealy Polyscope Company in July of 1902. So that was the final piece of the puzzle. The film was made in Indianapolis, Indiana, May 12, 1902, by the Sealy Polyscope Company.
Thank you, David. That was really a lot of interesting detective work that goes in there. We're going to screen the film in just a moment. And as you watch it, at the lower part of your screen, there is a thing that says reactions. If you have a question or something that you would like to ask later on in the presentation, that's a great place for you to kind of raise your hand. But I'd like to introduce Fred Dahlinger at this point. Fred is, as I said earlier, a longtime historian when it comes to wagons, when it comes to circus parades. He's written a number of books. He was a curator at the Ringling Museum in Sarasota and spent many years in the library at the Circus World Museum in Baraboo. So I reached out to Fred and said, I saw this film that David Kiehn and his wife Rena had presented, and I'd like for you to take a look at it because I think it's something that people should see and kind of get your perspective on it. So Fred, I'd like to bring you into the discussion now. And I'd like to also, kind of set it up for us. What was it like at the turn of the century when the circus came to town?
Thank you, Chris. I think the best thing to think about when we talk about the show's visiting is to remember that it was called Circus Day. It put it on a par with the July 4th and the Christmas holidays that were very important events for every community at that time. You might say that the circus came in and established its own temporary community within the city. It arrived in the railroad yards, it went through the streets with its equipment over to the lot, it coursed through the downtown area, it announced to everybody that the show was in town, and the circus was erected and people would come over early to see the whole process of setting up. So it really was a disruption in the daily activities of most communities and gave reason for many people to not go to work, kids not to go to school, businesses to close early, and literally take a day off and go to the circus. So we're talking about a significant event, not only in small communities, but even in large cities like Indianapolis, where this film was made.
So we're going to show the film now, and I appreciate your narration on this, Fred. It doesn't have any other sound associated with it, but I'd like to kind of set the date here. So it's early May. It's 1902. It's a Monday, and to your point, it's Circus Day. So you're going to see children in the crowd. You're going to see them, along the sidewalks. You're also going to see people really dressed up. People used to really dress up when the circus came to town, I guess, at least in Indianapolis. And with no further ado, let's roll the film.
Well, actually, we're going to have a little bit of a contextual presentation before we roll the film.
Okay.
I've got 10 images that are going to help to set the context, and then we'll actually roll the film with stills of the various wagons. I think, Kristen, you're a little bit ahead here. We need to see image T1, please. There we go. Thank you. Well, thank you all for attending this special Zoom session about the 1902 Ringling Brothers Parade film. Within the next 10 images, I'll establish a context for the film that will be screened. That will be followed by the film, which will be interrupted by 28 images that better illustrate the vehicles passing through the streets. You're welcome to make notes and to ask questions about my remarks or the images utilized at the conclusion of the film screening. Something akin to a recovery bridge spanned between the two valleys that were the panics of 1893 and 1907. The midpoint, 1900, was the middle year of a 5-year tour of Europe staged by Barnum and Bailey, which started in late 1897, with a winter season in London, England, and then continued for 5 annual summer tours thereafter through England and through Western Europe. Image, please, Kristen. While Barnum and Bailey toured Europe, Bailey kept his finger on the rapidly rising Ringling Brothers, who in little more than a decade built a small overland troupe into an efficient, money-making railroad show that challenged his stateside supremacy. Four Paw Cells, seen in this view, and Buffalo Bill's Wild West were intended to hold the territory, but the brothers from Baraboo started to route their train wherever they desired by 1894. Their forays eventually spanned coast to coast and border to border, everywhere gaining approval and making their world's greatest shows a known brand. The Ringlings started in 1884 with equipment made by their own hands, and their first bandwagon, seen here, reflects this economical approach. They bought a couple secondhand Burr Robbins parade wagons in the late 1880s. Through the 1890s, they bought additional used pieces to expand and enhance their street presentation. An entirely new bell wagon was added in 1892, and they commissioned a set of 15 mostly tableau-style cages to replace the others lost in an 1892 railroad mishap. 3 new tableau wagons came on in the mid-1890s, and in each year they made improvements to their circus. The 1902 film demonstrates to a limited degree the quality of the Ringling procession on the eve of 1903. Nurtured with purchases and commissions through the 1890s, it ultimately matched what Bailey put on the streets via his troops. At that moment, the length and quality of the Ringling, Four Paw Cells, and Barnum Bailey troops were on a par with one another. All fulfilled viewer expectations and primed them to head to the circus lot to buy tickets. Film production companies of the time were obsessed with getting every human endeavor onto the record, but the 1902 Ringling Route Book account of the day's events disclosed the purpose in making this documentary film on May 12th. Quote, "On Monday, pictures of the parade were taken for the Black Top Annex," end quote. Apparently, one or more of the brothers had commissioned Seelig to produce the film so that they could show it in their portable theater, housed in a top made with black dyed canvas to keep out the sunlight. The surprising thing about the film is that it covers less than a third of the entire parade and excludes many of the better features. Not all of the parade items specified in the 1908 Seelig catalog entry are seen in the film. One of the omissions was this clown bandwagon, which carried carvings dating back to at least 1879, the oldest in the Ringling's presentation. There are also numerous splices in the parade coverage. They may have resulted from the technology and practice of the time, or losses or editing at a later date. A Ringling parade of the time would have included 50 to 60 units and taken about 10 to 15 minutes to pass a fixed point. The combined and overlapping film coverage in the two sequences you're going to see includes about a third to a half of the entire parade. The catalog specified, quote, "grand tableau wagons representing the different nations of the world," end quote, but these were not to be seen. These vehicles, like the Great Britain tableau here, did not exist and were not part of the 1902 Ringling Parade. This means that the 1908 film catalog description was not written until 1903 or later. It's possible that the film may have been shown in the Ringling blacktop and thereafter released generally by Seelig in an abbreviated edition for commercial sale. 2 nursery rhyme-inspired floats were specifically noted in the description, Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella, and neither were included. Only 2 of the show's fancy tableau wagons were recorded, and at least 5 others were absent, along with the show's big tiger cage and the hippo den. But there's what I'm going to term bonus action to absorb. The parade script called for the mounted parade marshals periodically along the length, and you'll see them on their horses. They assured a safe and proper presentation. Plumes were placed on team horses and flags flew at the wagon corners, with every participant in special wardrobe, including wagon drivers and assistants. In addition to the scripted circus personnel, there are locals seen in the coverage. These include the people lining the sidewalks, others pacing the parade on bicycles. The small boys and girls tagging along with a hand on a wagon just ahead of a wheel alarmed safety-conscious folks and attorneys today, but it was routine back then. As David analysis confirms, the parade was covered by one film crew or perhaps two in different locations. The filming doesn't seem to have been coordinated, so there's some duplication between them, and each also has unique footage. The first camera location seen in the film was on the east side of North Capitol Avenue at West Market Street, looking northwest at the Indiana State House in the background, which is still standing in downtown Indianapolis today. The parade is headed south owing to the unique placement of the Capitol. The angle provides a view of the left-hand side of the vehicles. The selection of a prominent background recalls that in the mid-19th century, British and American circus poster artists frequently portrayed a parade feature passing by a well-known structure of importance, thereby giving a prominent local context to an itinerant entertainment organization. The second location was on the south side of West Washington Street, looking northwest at the Park Theater and the Cleveland Club, which was at number 138. This perspective gives a view of the right-hand side of the vehicles. The parade was headed east on West Washington Street because the even-numbered structures were on the north side of the street. The juxtaposition of the two sites suggests that the parade made a loop in the downtown area, coming from and then returning to the lot. We cannot discern whether there was one crew at both locations or if there were two crews. We also don't know which coverage is first, time-wise. The lead bandwagon is in both sequences, but Al Ringling's carriage that preceded it is only in the second portion. With the day, the date, and the location set, it's time to watch the parade. So Kristen, please start the film. Well, while Kristen is working her magic, I'll just remind you that we'll be showing the whole film, and then there'll be the interruptions to show you specific detailed photographs of the wagons. And then at the end of that, there'll be an opportunity for you to all ask whatever questions you would like, and we'll attempt to present the answers to you.
And Kristen, there we go. If you could turn off your cameras, it would probably improve the bandwidth and we'll get it moving a little faster. If you can see how to turn off your cameras.
Okay, here's our first entry. It was there. There it is. This is the lead bandwagon of the show, a wagon known as the Lion Tableau, being drawn by 8 dapple percherons. The Seeley catalog described the lead vehicle in the Ringling Street procession as, quote, the finest bandwagon in the world, drawn by 12 magnificent horses, end quote. They were wrong on the number of horses, but close to the mark on the wagon. The big Ringling bandwagon was a grand exhibition of the woodcarver's art and has endured to become a great artifact of American circus history. Usually drawn by 8 or 10 horses, it always looked superb, a great parade feature that truly enhanced Ringling parade quality. The wagon was deep red with gilded carvings, the windjammers on top clothed in dark blue uniforms with gold trimming. The Lion Tableau, which is the proper name for the bandwagon form, was actually commissioned in 1882 by Adam Forepaugh. It was built by Sebastian in New York, the applied decorations probably carved by Samuel Robb's shop. The vehicle was constructed as a telescoping tableau, as seen here, to carry an elevated equestrian figure of St. George in combat with a dragon. The Ringlings bought, you need to reverse the other direction, Kristen. There we go. The Ringlings bought both the detached float made from the top dragon and equestrian figure, and also the large bottom-shaped box piece, which served as their lead bandwagon from 1893, and later on the show through 1920 as the number 2 bandwagon, followed by service on Christie in the 1920s and Cole Brothers in the 1930s, and it finally entered preservation in the 1960s. A restoration was done about 25 years ago that returned this fabulous wagon to the appearance that it had on the Ringling Show about 1902. Resplendent in real gold leaf, it is truly a spectacular example of circus vehicle art. I took a little bit of extra time to do this wagon because it was the grandest one in the vehicle, in the procession, but for the other vehicles, we'll only show you one additional picture. So on to the next one. Obviously, the film is moving at a little bit of a slower than natural pace. It gives you a little bit more time to examine and enjoy it. Okay. Our next entry is Tableau Cage Wagon number 51. In 1893, the Miller brothers of Baraboo and the Milwaukee Ornamental Carving Company fabricated a set of 11 closed and 4 open cages to replace those lost in the railroad mishap towards the end of the 1892 season. Several carvings from the sideboards of this wagon survive on a little bandwagon and a small tableau constructed for the All-American Circus of 1942. If you look there closely, you can see the number 1 as part of the 51 assignment to the wagon.
At the lower part of your screen, there is if you take your mouse down there, it'll say start video, stop video. If you can turn off your video, it will speed up the film.
Okay, the second cage wagon in the procession appears only very briefly, and you have to look very closely for it. The identity of that particular wagon could not be discerned from the film, so I've arbitrarily included this shot of another very finely executed tableau cage that was done for 1893. This is number 52. Most of these closed cages all had these very finely carved and decorated side panels that were removable on one side so that during the parade, only the right-hand side people were able to see the animals inside. The rest of the folks would have to go to the show and look at them in the menagerie. There you can see the wagon very briefly on the right. It's going to pass from the scene very quickly.
And the girl running across the street is what you were talking about when you said lawyers would have an interest in that, right, Fred?
Yes, that one, and before on the lead bandwagon, there was a little boy walking just in front of the rear wheel. Now here's our third cage wagon.
So Fred, what kind of animals would be in these cages?
It's a great variety: lions, tigers, kangaroos, mammals of all types, different deer, elk, a large number of mammals for the most part. Okay, now this is cage number 50. It's an open cage. It's pretty much like the other tableau cages, except it lacks the carved sideboards. These were equally as fine as those that you would see on any other show. And I might just note that the Barnum and Bailey show, starting in 1883, had a set of these tableau cages also.
And this is the tableau cage here.
This is our cage with both sides open. The next one will be one with the carved panels.
Looks like a lion in there to me. Maybe.
Lions were among the most favored animals for the crowd. I think the lions and the tigers.
So I know a lot of times these parade people wearing the pith helmets, is that kind of a distinguishing trademark of a Ringling Parade?
The Ringling show was the best known for them, but after they bought the Barnum and Bailey show and Four Parcells, they also instituted the hats on the drivers on those shows too. This is another one of the open cages. This is number 35. Again, it was one of those made in 1893. And because both sides are open, people on both sides of the street could observe the animals inside. And I would agree with you, Chris, it looks like there's a bunch of lions inside this cage.
So we talked a little bit about the length of a parade. How, you see these posters that say, 3-mile long parade, but it wasn't really 3 miles long, right?
No, they weren't. Typically, a parade like this in its full length would pass before a single point somewhere in the realm of 10 to 15 minutes. And if you do a little bit of calculations at a rate of 4 miles per hour, that leaves you with a parade length of about 2/3 of a mile, I think in the realm of about 3,300 feet. So it was considerably less than what the advertising would say. This is one of the more unusual cages that was on the Ringling show. There's the image. It was number 29. It had 4 military-styled figures on the corner. There were only a couple of this type of cage on the Ringling show, and we think that they were made in the late 1890s by the Millers and decorated with statues that came to them from the Adam Forepaugh Circus when they bought some secondhand equipment from the show. And this particular wagon disappears pretty much after these pictures are taken in 1902. It didn't stay around very long.
We see the circus here and, it's obviously a big city. You've got the Capitol, the State House building behind it. But this parade would happen every day in every town, right? If it was a one-day event, Fred?
Yes. Typically, the Ringlings were very proud of the brand that they created. And when the show came to town, you got the full performance, you got the full parade, the full sideshow presentation. They did not do what's called a John Robinson, meaning to circumvent and shorten the show because of weather or other difficulties. If they had to resort to something, they'd either cancel entire parade or cancel performance in terms of inclement weather. But they really recognize the importance of maintaining the quality of their brand across the country from border to border and coast to coast.
So this fellow who's coming up on the right here is some sort of a outrider or parade marshal of some sort, right?
That's correct.
He's there to kind of make sure that nothing happens bad.
There were parade marshals along the entire length of the parade route. Each of them might have responsibility for between 5 and 10 units in the parade. If there were difficulties with horses or something else would happen, they were the ones that would marshal to help get maybe the wagon off to the side where it could be serviced, or otherwise deal with the problem at hand. And then they would begin to close up the opening in the parade so that there wouldn't be a gap developing later on. This is another one of the open cages, number 36. You can see they did a little bit different with the two-tone paint job behind the corner post carvings. And again, it looks like they've got, I think it looks like tigers that they have in this cage. They were partitioned internally so that the animals could not reach one another while in the wagon.
So Fred, our friend Peter Gorman asked the question about the marshals. I mean, they typically, I know that, Fred Bradna, the longtime equestrian director for the Barnum and Bailey and Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus was one of these marshals. They worked with the show. They had other jobs, right?
That's correct. You know, around a circus, everybody had to be generally useful, which meant you had your primary responsibility, but through the day, you oftentimes were assigned other jobs that you had to accomplish. Somebody might be the show mailman. Other people might have little things that they sold on the side, so they'd go up to town and buy candy bars or little treats that they could sell to other people on the show. But all of the marshals did have other jobs of responsibility on the show. If you can imagine, these people were helping to represent the brand out in the streets. So they had to be somebody that, number one, knew how to handle horses. Number two, work with people. Number three, treat a crowd with great politeness. And also deal with things like the man on his bicycle with a dog walking along. You had to be very careful if you had a runaway team, you know, how to accomplish the stopping of it without causing any injury to anybody. This vehicle now coming into view was the only vehicle that came from outside the United States. It was imported by Adam Forepaugh for his circus from Great Britain in the 1880s. And as you see it here, it was a rebuild of the original configuration, which had 3 levels to it. It sort of looked like a wedding cake. The Ringlings bought this wagon in the fall of 1889 with 3 other wagons, and it served on the show up until the early 1900s when they sold it to their cousins, the Golomar brothers. And then from there on, it went to about 3 other shows before it finally is lost to history about 1925.
So this was part of so you said that the Ringlings bought this from Forepaugh in 1889. They had another big purchase from Forepaugh that year too, didn't they?
Well, there are actually 4 wagons that were part of that purchase in the fall of 1889. The lead band wagon, the Lion tableau, was one of them, the 3-tier tableau. There was a large tableau that served as a ticket wagon. And then there was another vehicle, which is also not in the parade, but we saw it as the clown ticket wagon. It was the top skyboards off of a big organ wagon made into a tableau.
And Adam Forepaugh himself died in the winter of 1889, 1890.
That's correct. He died after the brothers were out there in the late 1889. He died early 1890. And 2 of the brothers, John and Otto, went back out and attended his funeral.
You know, Adam Forepaugh is a name that most Americans outside of the circus history world don't know today, but he was as big as Barnum, wasn't he? Or almost as big.
Well, my argument is through the late 1870s and into the 1880s, the Forepaugh show was either the equal to or greater than Barnum and Bailey. He really did have a tremendous show. He was the first man to buy an entire train of specially built railroad cars to haul his show. He was also involved in the formation of some other shows, so a very important showman.
So looks like we're going to kind of start it from the beginning here. I don't know, Kristen, if you can move this forward just a little bit. But, you know, so when you take a look at this, and this, I guess they called it Arabia when it was on Forepaugh. I don't know if they still called it that. But this particular group, they almost look as though they might be, you know, African tumblers or things like that on these camels, but they might not be, right?
It's hard to say who they might be. Sometimes the people were foreigners from a nation afar, and sometimes they portrayed people by means of the wardrobe that they donned and the activities that they did. But oftentimes, I think the group that you just saw riding on those Bactrian camels, it looked to me like they might be Moroccan tumblers. There were many tumbling troops that came out of Morocco to work on circuses in the United States. A descendant of one of those, and one of the participants was George Hammond, who later became very well known in the indoor circus business.
So tell us about this little wagon coming up. Yeah,
This is a little float wagon that featured the griffin on the front and a seashell on the back. It was on the Ringling show after it had been on the Barnum and London show in the 1880s. We don't know how it got between the 2 shows, but after 1903, this wagon, along with 2 others that you're going to see, were sold by the Ringlings to Ernest Hagg, who operated the Mighty Hagg Circus. And what they did is they put this small calliope into it, and you can't discern it in this picture, but we know from other sources that the woman playing it is Mabel James, who was the mother of band leader Harry James.
Yeah. So, and when you see those, I guess those are ponies that are pulling that, it looks like what, at least 6 of them, and I think there might even been an 8.
I think I did the count at 6 of them, Chris.
Okay. There's the Moroccan tumblers again, or at least, yeah, and here they come again. I think it's interesting that the women are all riding side saddle too. I don't know if you noticed that, folks.
That's pretty conventional for the equestrians who were in the parade. This little wagon here is the first of several that we're going to see. In August of 1896, the Ringling brothers bought the W.B. Reynolds Circus out of Rockford, Illinois, and with it came these small wagons. They used them around the turn of the century to build something that they called the Children's Menagerie Department, and it was something that appealed to small children. It was also something of a competitive device to go up against the smaller dog and pony shows, who had multitudes of small wagons that would appeal to family trade in the afternoon in particular. And if you notice, you can see that the sides on this have some type of a painting. Those that are discernible, all of them exhibit some type of nursery rhyme portrayal.
And how many of these were there, Fred?
There are about 6 of them. And coming into view now, this is another one of the small cages that were on the show. We actually did not know that this wagon was with Ringling until this particular film became available. There are no other photographs showing it with the Ringling show, but we knew that in 1902, the Ringlings commissioned Sullivan and Eagle to build a number of miniature cages, and I think it's reasonable to conclude that this is one of the wagons that they built for 1902. So this is the first time out for them.
And it really, you can really see the size of it. There was a gentleman that was standing next to it there, and he almost came up to the top of it. You know, probably 5'9" or so.
Yeah, they were really small to appeal to the children. Let's just take a look at this one here. There we go, Chris. Kristen is having a real challenge because some of these wagons come into view and all of a sudden, bang, they're gone. Okay, we're on the one we want to be. This is another one of these small cages from the W.B. Reynolds show. And like I say, there are about 6 of them. If you look very closely at that painting, it looks to me like it's a representation of Mother Goose. It's a woman shown on a flying goose of some sort. So that was one of the first clues that said these are all decorated with nursery rhyme decorations. And you can see it also there on the side of the wagon. And this is another significant wagon. There we go. This wagon was another one of those that we didn't know was with the Ringling show until the film became available. We already had known of this particular photograph here, which shows it on the Mighty Hag show. So we now know that there were at least 3 wagons that were sold about 1903, 1904 by Ringlings to the Mighty Hag. And the reason we can align this with the Sullivan and Eagle is that duck carving with the scroll around it that you see. An exact duplicate of that was on the back end of the 1897 ticket wagon that Sullivan and Eagle built for the Great Wallace show. So knowing of the order of these miniature cages, knowing that this one has detailing seen on another Sullivan and Eagle wagon, pretty much assures that's the source of those wagons.
So Fred, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but so the 1902, you know, the Ringling show is it's a railroad show, a big railroad show. Mighty Hag in those years was a wagon show still, right?
That's correct. Mighty Hag was a modest but very powerful local overland show. And he finally accrued enough money that in 1908, he went on rails with a rail show and did that through 1914. And then he decided he just liked life better as an overland showman and went back onto his wagons and went across country and sold all of his railroad equipment.
And just a footnote to that Mighty Hag railroad or wagon show. About that same time, I had written an article for Bandwagon a year or so ago about Emmett Kelly, the famous clown. And Emmett Kelly, his first exposure to a circus was he was working in a field when he was about 8 years old, would have been about 1906. And the Mighty Hag Circus passed by this farm field and he remembered it and went to the show that night in this little town of Houston, Missouri that he lived in.
The wagon that you just saw right in the passing of the film and now here in this still, this is another very rarely seen wagon. In fact, the film image and this particular image are the only two that I've ever seen of it. It's another one of those small WB Reynolds cages, but this one's been ornamented with a figure on each corner and one on top. And I've looked and I cannot discern the nature of the figures on the corners, but the one on top appears to be kind of a scrawny looking Uncle Sam.
Sure does.
Just my guess right now, we don't have any parade descriptions that specify who these characters were supposed to represent.
Another one of the marshals, I guess.
One of the marshals. And then here comes another one of those small WB Reynolds cages. And like I say, there were about 6 of them on the show. The Great Wallace shows, which was another railroad show out of Peru, Indiana, a very fine show, but smaller than the Ringling show, also had a children's menagerie and also had a set of vehicles akin to these. And here we return to another one of the 1893 tableau cages. This is number 37 in the parade. The picture you're seeing now, the still is either number 37 or number 38. We don't know because we cannot see the front. And the sides on both of those wagons were absolutely identical. But again, you can see the very fine quality of the decorations that were put onto these vehicles. And what you're going to see now is the Ringling mounted band, which was a very popular feature. And for those of you who are musicians trying to play while you're riding a horse, I think gives new meaning to the experience.
Especially not on if you weren't on a paved road.
Yeah, on a cobblestone.
Yeah.
The wagon that Kristen's trying to bring up right there on the left-hand side, again, it's only the little bit that you can see. But this is one of the 2 tableaus that actually did make it into the parade film. And you can see it here at the back end of the chandelier department. Those are oil tanks that were hung around the big top center poles with burners that were then sticking up out of the top and lit to provide nighttime illumination. But the wagon with the big oval and the 2 figures in it was one of those made in the mid 1890s for the Ringling show. And the unique thing about this one is the heads of the 2 figures that are on the side of the wagon were removed before it left Baraboo when it was sold to the King brothers in the 1920s. And those 2 heads are now here and preserved at Circus World.
Interesting. And I know that, we've got a lot of people who have been to Circus World on this call, but I got to tell you folks, if you get a chance to, especially after COVID, to make a trip to Baraboo, the collection of parade wagons there is extraordinary. There's Al Ringling.
Yeah, if you could back up just a second there, Kristen. I'm sorry, to the parade. There you go. Yeah, that's the owner's carriage. The one thing that the Ringling Brothers firmly believed in was to make a personal present or have a personal presence in the parade. And the man that did it for them was Al Ringling, who is driving his carriage right here. Al was the guy that had the original idea for the circus for the brothers. And after the passing of James A. Bailey in 1906, he was generally looked up to as America's finest showman. And if you didn't believe that, the Wisconsin state legislature passed a bill shortly before he passed away on New Year's Day, 1916, and formally recognized him as America's greatest showman.
So, we've switched angles here. So this is the second scene. We're going to see some of the same wagons, right, Fred?
That's correct. It's mostly a duplicate of what we saw before, but there's, I think, 1 or 2, maybe 3 different things that you're going to see.
And again, watch for the kids who are holding on to these wagons, because as a parent, I don't know if I would like my kids that close to horses and wagons and wheels and all those things.
Here's a repetition of the lead bandwagon, the lion tableau that we saw before. And here it is at another location. And you can see again, Al Ringling is out front of the lead bandwagon, and there's a whole string of cage wagons behind it. If you can imagine, Al Ringling is looking forward to make sure there's no obstructions or difficulties upcoming before the parade. And while he's looking forward, his ears are tuned backwards so that he can enjoy and listen to the circus music being put out by the windjammers atop the wagon. And I am sure that they knew that the owner was listening, and they would give it their all as they played a stirring march or another circus tune.
You know, I like this photograph, Fred, because it shows, again, it's not a paved road. It looks like it's actually a dirt road. And these parades would go rain or shine, right?
Absolutely. And they had to be cleaned up before they went into town, even if it was a muddy main street like you see here. When they went down the main street for the first time, the wheels had all been washed, everything was spruced up, and they were putting their best foot forward. After the lion tableau, which is passing right here, it's another one of the 1893 tableau cages. It's actually one that we saw before, number 51, and you'll recognize the picture of it when Kristen pulls it up. There it is. This is the one that the carvings still survive today on a little bandwagon and tableau. And this is quite an unusual wagon. This is a snake den. The sides of the wagon were not wood, they were plate glass so that somebody could look into it and see a woman standing there while she was charming the various snakes that were laying around either on her or on the floor inside the wagon. We don't know the origins of this wagon, but it looks like it was one made by the Millers in the middle 1890s, and they may have reused the corner images off of another older wagon that came to them from the Forepaw show.
I know there's a Ringling snake wagon, snake den in Baraboo, but this is a different wagon, right?
That's correct. The one that survives today was a much larger vehicle made in 1903 by the Bodie Wagon Company. It was one of 6 that were made for the enlarged 1903 show by the Ringling Brothers. And here we see a tandem rider with 2 caramel-colored horses, followed by another lady driving a tandem hitch and a man with tandem horses also.
Fred, you know, we're looking at wagons here from the late 1890s. You said some of them from the 80s. What about the wagons, the early circus wagons from the 1840s and 50s? Any of those pre-war wagons, pre-Civil War wagons exist?
No, unfortunately, I think the earliest fragments that are known to survive today are probably from a vehicle that was built in 1868, and these are just fragmentary carvings. Nothing survives in total until about 1878. The bottom of the Adam Forepaw Car of the Seasons still survives, and we know it today as the Five Graces bandwagon.
So this is a familiar wagon coming up, I see in the parade.
Yeah, this is a wagon that Peggy and many others that were with the Ringling show certainly will recognize, and others will too. It's the famous Ringling Brothers Bell wagon. It was aggrandized in publicity materials as the colossal cathedral chimes of Moscow's famous Kremlin Tower. And what it really was were 9 bells that were cast in Milwaukee by the Campbell & Sons Centennial Bell and Iron Works. And it was fitted onto a chassis made by the Millers and decorated with carvings from the Milwaukee Ornamental Carving Company in Milwaukee.
And what a history that this wagon has had, because even after the day of the historic circus parade, it appeared on the Ringling Circus in the 40s, right?
That's correct. And the wagon is still the possession of Felder Entertainment. So it's been owned by an enterprise in the entertainment business from its origin in 1892 up until and including 2021. And it's now stored down in Ellenton, Florida.
And while it's in storage now, it's been on display in both Baraboo and Sarasota over the past 15 years anyway.
Yes.
See more of these women riding side saddle here, I see.
One thing that people admired, you know, we're in the era of horse and buggy days, and the circus put extremely fine horses out on the street, and they were admired by everybody that locally knew anything about horses.
So it would be like a parade of Corvettes and Lamborghinis. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much so. This is you can see a wagon there on the left. That's about the best glimpse you're going to see of it. So Kristen will put up a side view that gives you an even better look at it. This was another one of the tableaus that were made by the millers for the Ringlings in the mid-1920s, mid-1890s. And you can see it here. It was very elegantly carved. And that's about all I can say about it.
Now I see, here comes that streetcar that our friend David Kiehn identified as being the Blake Street. And that was kind of one of the things that how we were able to identify this, or at least initially, that it was Indianapolis. So good job there, David.
Yeah. I think Kristen is going to try and back up here for a minute. Right there. Yep. It's another very seldom seen and not very well covered wagon in this production, but the wagon that you're seeing the front of is this cage wagon right here. It's one of an extraordinary type called a cottage cage because it had dormers and roof surfaces that looked like a cottage. And so they call it a cottage cage. This one was one of 5 that came into the Ringling possession after the end of the 1898 tour, when they had released the John Robinson Circus. And because of contractual difficulties, the Ringlings returned the show, but they held on to these 5 cottage cage wagons and also the nursery rhyme floats that were part of the Robinson show. And apparently it settled up the matter because the John Robinson show did not sue the Ringlings over the retention of those vehicles.
Now those cottage cage wagons, as you say, they're kind of, in circus history, they're kind of revered in a lot of ways. What happened to them?
They were dispersed both by the Ringling show, which had 5 of them, and also by the John Robinson show that had about 30 of them. And they just went hither and yon to many different shows. The last one existed generally in a pretty complete state. It ended up going to Disneyland in the mid-1950s. And unfortunately, when they were into their wagon remanufacturing program, they took it apart and never put it back together. So that was the last of the cottage cages, as far as I know.
The Moroccans again on their camels.
These are the Bactrian camels. You can think of 2 humps being a B on its side, and that's why they're the Bactrian camels. And of course, here come the elephants. In the other sequence in the film, if you look very closely, you'll notice that on the left-hand side, there was a single African elephant, and that was Fanny. She dated back to the show in the late 1880s. We're going to put one more picture up, and that's this one right here. And not seen in the film was the show's steam Calliope. The filming crews often ran out of film after focusing on too many different wagons and ran out of film by the time the Calliope got to them. Starting in 1872, the Circus Parade was traditionally concluded by the ear-splitting music of this machine. It emotionally excited people, especially young children, who followed it like a Pied Piper to the circus lot. The Ringlings bought an older unit from the John Robinson show in the early 1890s, and they had their cousins, the Miller brothers of Baraboo, remake it for 1902. So it was seen for the first time in Indianapolis that season on Monday, May 12th, the sun resplendently reflecting off the polished brass whistles, the brass jacket around the coal-fired boiler, and the gilded dragons that framed the presentation. It signaled the end of the daily street parade and also serves to conclude our interpretation of this very rare and valuable film that we appreciate the opportunity to display for you. So thank you very much for your attentiveness.
That's terrific, Fred, and thank you for your research going into this film too. David Kiehn, Rena, his wife, they have been terrific in showing us this. If anybody has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand. We're going to watch it one more time here, and I may ask you some questions as we go through here because I think it's going to be moving a little bit faster. We're not going to stop it this time.
If you ever visited the Milwaukee Parade, you'll know that the police did a very effective job in keeping everybody off the streets. And you can see back at this time frame that there was no restraint that way. You pretty much were putting yourself at risk if you were walking between the wagons or close by to them or things of that nature.
I'm gonna ask David Kiehn to turn on his microphone. I got a question here from our friend Mark St. Leon, who is in Australia actually, and the question is basically the film stock, the nitrate based film. tell us a little bit about, how was it survived? I always hear it's flammable and so forth.
That's true. The nitrate stock, can you hear me? Just to check.
Yes.
Okay, the nitrate stock was very flammable. If you had a match near it, it would flame up, and it contained its own oxygen source, so it would even burn underwater. You simply couldn't put the film out. It had to burn itself out. And so that's why a lot of the silent film, and even they would use this film stock, nitrate stock, into 1950. So that was a problem all the way through that time period, with film catching on fire and being destroyed that way. And so that's one of the reasons why nitrate film didn't survive. It was also deteriorated over time, and it would get sticky, stick to itself, fuse into a solid mass, and then turn into powder. And that's unfortunately one of the things that is seen in nitrate film that is in cans today. If you don't know if it's going to survive when you open it up, it could be just a can full of powder. Although this nitrate film had nitric acid in it and would eat right through a metal can as well. So it's kind of scary to think about, but if it's handled like you handle gasoline, it can survive. And strangely enough, some of the earlier film is actually better preserved from, say, the film from the 1920s.
Was this film intact when you got it, or did you have to do some editing to it?
It was in great shape. It's the oldest film that we have in our collection, and it's actually one of the best preserved.
So I want to ask Fred a question here. I think coming up here, I believe still, there are some chariots, Roman chariots, and I think it's coming up right here, maybe. But so tell us a little bit about those races, the hippodrome races, and the use of there. Look, there's a guy with the chariot right there. Just went past us.
There were a couple of hippodrome shows that toured America in the 1850s, but they then embraced the hippodrome track as part of the big top when they started making larger tents in the 1870s. So you'd have either 1, 2, or 3 rings, and they'd be encircled by a hippodrome track. And what they did was they staged races on the track, and the most thrilling of those were these 4-horse teams pulling a Roman-style chariot. And these guys, from my understanding, they really went hell-bent for leather. I mean, they roared around the track very, very fast, several laps, trying to beat one or the other. And this was not staged in any real safe manner. In fact, these chariot races were still being staged in Europe until recent times. And I believe it was Gunther Gable Williams' father-in-law who was injured in one of these chariot races and eventually died from his injuries.
Yeah, that would have been Jeanette Williams' father. So once again, we get a chance to kind of see this in its entirety. I will encourage you also to check out both the Niles Film Museum's Facebook page and also even their website. They have other programs actually related to the circus, especially as it relates to silent film stars, people like Poodles Hannaford, who starred in a number of silent films, and they've done some other programs. I know this past fall, their October, November, and December series focused on circus silent films. So you'll definitely want to check that out. And our new friends, David and Rena, and also Sam Gill, who's also a film historian who's on the call with us here today. So it's a kind of a nice way to merge circus history with film history. And I appreciate them making this film. Well, first of all, saving the film and then making it available to us today. Of course, Fred Dahlinger's, tremendous research into circus wagons and parades. We wouldn't have known all of these things, probably, at least not at one setting, if it weren't for Fred. So I know you all appreciate him too. We're going to continue to watch this till the end. I want to tell you a couple of things about the Circus Historical Society. We have a number of people who are on the call who are members of the Circus Historical Society. I would also encourage you to consider going to circushistory.org, which is our website. It was probably on an invitation you may have seen. Circushistory.org is also a place where this is a free presentation, but obviously, we're a not-for-profit organization like most organizations are. And there's a donate button up there if you feel so compelled to give a couple of bucks for your experience today. It will go towards furthering circus history and education about circus history too. So the Niles Museum, Peggy Williams, our friend from Ringling and Feld, had asked the question about the Niles Film Museum. I think if you do a Google search for Niles Film Museum, you can find their stuff. It's also on Facebook. But as I said, there's some really good things there about circus films that they have done, and we hope to continue to partner with them in future projects too. Circus History Live is a monthly presentation that we do for the Circus Historical Society. We've got one coming up next month too that I hope you'll consider joining us for. We tend to do these on Saturday evenings because, especially during the pandemic, it's a lot better than watching television right now, and it's more fun too. So we have this global community that we've created by taking the amazing value of the internet and pulling together our common interest in circus history. And what a great thing that this is. So if we have no further questions, and it looks as though we might actually have a question or two, there's some things in the chat about how you can find that Niles Film Museum on Facebook, and also the circus programs that were presented earlier this year. So thanks again, folks. We will be reaching out to you probably just to kind of get some feedback from you on what you have experienced today. We'll also send you the links to not only this program, but also other things about the Circus Parade. There's a YouTube video of it. All you have to do is search Ringling Circus Parade 1902, and it will come up, and it's got music to it. You don't have to listen to us talk about it. But that concludes the presentation today, and I hope we'll have you again back next month. So thanks, Fred. Thanks, David. Thanks, Rena. Thank you very much, Bruce Hawley, and most importantly, Kristen Lee, who was our producer and video switcher today. So thanks again, folks, and we'll see you down the road.
Come on. Good night, everyone.